Live from the chicken wing capital of the world, Buffalo, New York. You're listening to the Childcare Bridge podcast, your source for the best tips, tools, and tactics on how to market and grow your childcare center, ensuring total domination. Total domination. This is the Childcare Bridge, and this is your host, Michael Tasner.
Hey there, and welcome to this week's edition of the Childcare Bridge. Today's topic focuses on the T in MAST, and that is team. And it lasers in on this topic of culture. As always, I get a lot of questions around managing team, motivating team, how much to pay, and usually it's the opposite side of like, oh, I hate dealing with all these people. Our team can be lazy. They're not like what they used to be. Nobody wants to work. And it varies based on the center owner and or directors that we're talking to. But this concept of team is always going to come up day after day after day because we're a team and a people-driven business. There's never going to be a time that I can imagine where we're not going to have human team members at a center to offer care. Now, could there be these robots that Tesla is currently building that augment things? Yes. Do I think they're going to be able to help with the ratios? Probably not, but who knows what things will look like in 10 or 15 or even 20 years. But for the immediate future, we're going to be a team-driven organization. So if you know that you're always going to rely on people, you're always going to need people, and it's the same thing for me. Now, it's a little different from a marketing perspective because there are a lot of other ways that we can augment, not necessarily using robots, but with AI, and that can complement and enhance and move things forward a little bit faster. But there's always going to be this human-to-human interaction and this human-to-human element. And I struggle with the best place to start. And the reason that I struggle when it comes to team with the best place to start is that it's not a one-size-fits-all for every single center. And I never like giving generic advice or teaching you things that are a little bit generically. Because some centers, if I were to go in and do a deep dive and I were to look at it and see, well, geez, you are underpaying your team by like 50% compared to everyone else, I'm going to laser in on the pay stuff, which then is going to take me down a rabbit hole of what do your financials look like, the accounting. What is your tuition? When did you last raise your tuition? What do your enrollment vacancies look like? And that's going to take me down a lot of rabbit holes. So while the pay area is one that you cannot ignore, it's the number one deciding factor for someone to join your team or leave your team right now. That is where everyone is focused. I am seeing team members leaving for $2 an hour more, $1 an hour more. I historically don't see 50 cents an hour more where someone's literally going to leave to go somewhere else to make another $4 a day. But an hour, for an hour, to me, I'm like, you're going to leave for $8 a day? Well, then they do the math and they think, well, $8 a day, 40 hours a week, 4 work weeks, it's $160. Now, what they don't compute is all the taxes, and really at the grand scheme of things, it's maybe $120 or $100. I mean, it's to me, it's a little bit of a moot point, but for the average person, an extra $100 a month could be the difference of paying your rent on time. So the pay area is and will always, for at least the foreseeable future, continue to be the number one motivating factor. Was it the number one factor 10 years ago? 100% no. But it is the number one factor right now. But the area that I believe outside of pay that I can teach you on, that you can make a better impact, make a more positive impact, move the needle on, is your culture. And it's going to be a little bit of a gut check for you. But I want you to really think about this question. Do you have a culture that is by design? Or do you have a culture that is by default? By design means that most things that happen around your center are intentional. Certain signs, core values, which we're going to talk about, your policies and procedures, your recognition strategies. They're things that you have put into place because you've thought about it with your team and yourself and your leadership team, and you've designed it to be that way. By default, is your culture just is. And what I mean by just is, it would be defined by whatever you and your team say that it is. And it's more so your team, not you. So if I were to walk into your centers and ask your staff, how would you describe the atmosphere here? How would you describe the culture? What would your team say? And if they would say things like, yeah, I don't really know, or long hours and thankless job, what are they going to say? And you need to have that gut check and be real with yourself. If they're not going to spout out things like core values and leveling up and continuing to train and being a better person and contributing to society and making an impact and all, if they can't rattle off all the things that you have designed, then your culture is by default. It means that you haven't put the time, and not just time, but and the money, the resources. You haven't made it the number one priority, and then put your weight by way of time and some financial resources to actually showcase that it's your number one priority. Now, if I were to make up a statistic on the fly, and I should actually do a survey to see how many cultures are by design versus default in terms of what do the owners say, and then do another survey to the team members and ask that same question, worded a little bit differently, but similar question, I think the answers would be very, very different. I think most of your team would say we have just kind of by default and like it is what it is. And you'd be like, yeah, we have all these things designed and our team just doesn't do them or know about them or they don't participate. So what are some of the strategies that you can start to move the needle on without me saying, hey, you've got to do a complete 360 and it's going to take you a year and the investment's going to be six figures? Like, how do you actually move the needle on the team side of things over the next 30, 60, 90 days? So again, the first one is you need to get clear if you are drastically underpaying your staff. If you're drastically underpaying your staff, none of this other stuff is really going to matter because they're going to see it as, well, great, now you improve the break room for us, but I'm making $5 an hour less than the same type of center that's down the street. That one has to be addressed first. And I know that's not you just wave a magic wand, everyone gets a raise. But if you cannot afford to get wages to a better standard of living, you have a much larger problem outside of your culture. You have a numbers issue, you have an enrollment issue, branding issue that if you can't charge enough tuition, like there's a lot of other things that factor into not being able to pay better wages. So that's step one. Step two, on the culture side, I want you to do a little bit of a culture audit. And it starts to me with an anonymous questionnaire. And that's just asking your team to describe what it's like working here. What are the things that you like? What are the things that you don't like? How would you describe our center to other people that are potentially interested in working here? How do you describe it to families? And just start to see what they say. Start to gather just some intel, some insights so that you can at least kind of get that status quo. I'm all about always having a benchmark and a baseline. What does the baseline look like so that you know, okay, great, here's where we're starting from. And when you know where you're starting from, that's going to help potentially dictate one of a few different directions that you're going to go. But what I've realized in retooling and starting to build a culture by design rather than by default is that you have to do it jointly with your team. You have to involve your leadership team and ideally kind of a wider scope of your team. And you can start in one of a few different areas, but again, with everything, it's not a one size fits all. I love to start with core values and knowing the things that you believe are non-negotiables and the things that need to reign true about your centers, yourself, your team, your new hires, the type of families you want. What I love about core values is that it's like not even unwritten because I want them to be written, but it's the doctrine, a lot of what you're all about. So like one of my core values is lifelong learners. And we have processes and procedures where you need to invest at least 120 hours every year, 10 hours a month in upping your game. personal and professional development. So when I'm looking to hire people, one of the questions that we will hire and or fire on is around training. So I'll say, well, what do you like to do to kind of sharpen your axe? And if they say, well, I really haven't had time to do much personal or professional development in the last couple of years, like that, they're not even moving on to the next stage. They're gone. That question right there instantly eliminates them to move forward in our process. But the same thing is true with people that are currently here. If we've put the core values out there, if we have reiterated the core values every single week, if the owner has preached and demonstrated by my actions, your actions, this is how this core value is truthful. I mean, for example, yesterday I was doing training for 5 hours. Last week I did probably 20 hours. I enrolled in a seminar the next couple of months that's 4 days long and like 50 hours. I will blow the 120 number out of the water probably in the next 30 days. So if I'm demonstrating that, I'm showcasing that, we're talking about it every week, and then when we're doing our one-on-one meetings and we're getting feedback from the team, if people are showing me that they're doing zero training for a long period of time, they're not living out the core values. They're not being authentic to our organization. I love to start with the core values, and you want to, and I'm oversimplifying this, I'll link a couple of exercises, and this isn't a 5-minute process, but I love to start with gathering some feedback, and then starting to just interview the team a little bit more, and you'll start to find words and phrases and intricacies that make sense for your organization. I ideally want them to not be generic, and they need to actually mean something. It can't just be words on a wall that you want to feel good about. Making a difference. Okay, and I could argue making a difference should probably be everyone's core value, but what does that actually mean? How can your team demonstrate it? So I love to start with the core value aspect. Now, the other area that I want you to look at is just all about random acts of appreciation. I want you to look at what are the little fun things that you can do throughout the week to recognize different team members, your leadership team, your teachers, your assistants, the chefs. Little things can be as simple as a handwritten thank you card. It can be a $20 gift card to Starbucks. It can be improving the snacks in your break room every week. But looking at the things that not only do they get appreciated, but what are the things that are going to, again, continue to be true to your culture, but they're going to be authentic. Like if the team starts to expect a lunch every Friday, that's fine and dandy, but how can you then take that to the next level? There are dozens of books that have like thousands and thousands of questions that you could put on the table and have the team ask these questions during lunch to get to know each other, build bonds, build rapport a little bit further. So not only are you taking that lunch, they're getting a free delicious lunch, but they're also up-leveling and kind of learning about each other. That just amplifies those resources. But what I'm hearing and finding when we do these surveys all the time is that most of your staff do not feel appreciated. You might say, well, Michael, I tell them thank you all the time. I've given them a pay raise. I've done this and that. But if they're still telling me they're not feeling appreciated, something else at your culture is then missing. Maybe it's their direct supervisor, and that person is throwing that off and really making them feel like that. But when I look at the culture aspect to team, it's looking at the core values. It's looking at what are some of the other things that you can do that are fun and unique at your center for your staff. Having a break room is absolutely essential, and having things in that break room that you don't even think you need. The little fun things that are just different. Maybe it's a yogurt machine or an ice cream machine. Maybe it's having 3 different coffee makers rather than just a simple Keurig. It's looking at those little fun things that your team is going to appreciate and enjoy that are going to get them a little bit more excited. They're going to get them just a little bit more, well, yeah, I like that. I like that. So what I'm looking for you to do today is to look at, of the culture, A, do you have it by design or by default? If it's already by design, what else can you do to take it to the next level? How often are you preaching culture? It should be every single week. If you have a culture that you tell me is by design, I should be able to ask any one of your team members to rattle off the core values, and they should be able to tell me instantly. If they can't, then your culture is still by default. Go through that exercise and then look at how can I get some feedback, and then start to act on that feedback, action some of that feedback. Look at how you can retool your core values if you don't have them. Look at how you can involve your team to make sure that they are authentic to your organization. And then look at what are some of the fun little ways that you can just add some extra appreciation. There's another great book, I think it's 1,001 Ways to Reward and Thank Your Team Members. If you run out of ideas quickly, that's going to give you plenty. But it's the little things that continue to make the culture just feel special and feel different and feel unique. And those little things can actually buy you time. If you say, Michael, my pay differential is huge. It's not going to buy you a ton of time, but it will buy you some time while you continue to get that sorted out as well. But if you want better team, more grateful team, more loving team, caring team, it starts with you living out the culture, having a culture across your centers, being an example for the team, and showing them that you're grateful and thankful that they are here. Get out there, thank someone today, make a difference, make an impact, and you will continue to see things move in the positive direction. Michael Tasner signing off. Good morning, good afternoon, and good night. I'll see you next week.